Presidential initiatives can come and go, sometimes with little or no action taken on them. There is one presidential initiative that's still ongoing. Which initiative? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. In 2014, President Obama launched an initiative called My Brother's Keeper. The initiative was designed to address persistent opportunity gaps faced by boys and young men of color and ensure that all young people can reach their full potential. When he launched the initiative, President Obama also issued a challenge called the MBK Challenge, which asked cities, towns, counties, and tribes across the country to be MBK communities. On this show, we'll talk with a city council member and a consultant who are working in one local city that took on that MBK challenge. We'll discuss what the challenge involves, what they've been doing to meet it, and what they hope to achieve. Seated with me on my left is East Palo Alto's former mayor and current council member, Lisa Gaucher. Seated to my right is Victor Young, who is the managing director of VCY Stratagem LLC, which is described as a result-focused impact consulting firm in Oakland. Well, thanks so much for joining me. It's a pleasure having you with me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Of course. Now, we can't talk about the MBK Challenge without actually saying what it is. So, what does it involve?
Sure. The MBK Challenge is actually an initiative that is designed to change outcomes for young men and boys of color. And many times in our communities, we know our young women have the same challenges, so we include our young women. And it consists of 6 initiatives. The first one is making sure that kids are entering school ready to learn. The second one would be that they're reading at 3rd grade level by the end of the 3rd grade. We want to make sure that they're graduating from high school. Once they graduate from high school, they're going to college, that they come out of college with careers. And for those who have had some issues or had some challenges, let's give them second chances and give them better opportunities.
So, Victor, how did you get involved?
Well, I mean, my entire life's work has really been about trying to figure out how to really mobilize our communities to support the development of boys and girls of color, people of color in general. And so it was sort of a no-brainer, natural sort of progression of my work. I got involved here in East Palo Alto as a result of work with PolicyLink, which is based in Oakland, and really does national work, really framing cradle-to-career initiatives through the lens of equity. And so they engaged me. I've worked with their principals in the past, and got connected with folks in East Palo Alto about 7 months ago.
So initiatives come and go, and so do strategies for helping children learn. So what's so special about this one, or is there anything special about it that makes it different from all of the other ones that we've heard about?
So for me, it was during the time when I was mayor, and I went to Washington, D.C., and we were having conversations, and many of our meetings, they wanted to know if we had signed up for this My Brother's Keeper initiative. And looking at it, yes, we want to give our young people better opportunities and better chances. Being in Silicon Valley right now, with the diversity numbers being what they are, we want to be able to change that. And in order to change that, we know we have to change outcomes. So, which include definitely a better education.
So you know, it's interesting that someplace in the materials I was reading, it said we want to move from talk to action.
Yes.
Right.
And it's so easy to talk
Right.
about what we need to do. So what are some of the action steps?
Well, I think one of the things you said, you know, as you started this off, well, one of the things that you asked was, you know, how is this different from all the myriad of programs that are out there focused on supporting our kids.
And have been out there
And
for
have been
decades.
out there, correct. Well, there lies the rub. They've been out there for decades. And I think when the president really made this call to action, I think what he was envisioning was that communities could really align all of the energies and efforts that they had already ongoing in those communities focused on bits and pieces of the challenge to really move the needle for the specific population of kids we're talking about, initially young men of color, and then it expanded to young men and women of color, to really move that needle in a communal way. To really align our energies and efforts. One of the reasons we have all these programs that go in so many directions is that we have all these programs going in so many directions. So this is, I think it's fair to say, this is an alignment effort. This is really about aligning that energy in the community, connecting it with other successful evidence-based efforts around the country and moving sort of in the same direction.
Well, you know, you remind me of, what was it in terms of neighborhoods, from cradle to grave?
Oh, yeah, cradle to career
Cradle
was
to career,
the
right.
whole opportunity, or the whole approach is to make sure that we're looking at the broad spectrum and we're taking
Yes,
care of our
and
community.
there was some, Promise Neighborhoods, I
Neighborhoods.
think a few years ago. And there's always an effort to align the energies, but it never happens. Or let us say it hasn't happened to the extent that major differences have resulted.
Right. And in this
For
initiative,
kids.
and that's what we want to do. We want to change, you know, and then we look at it within East Palo Alto. We have a lot of organizations that are doing a lot of great things. But if we can bring them together and focus the energy so that we change initiatives. So there's 6 initiatives, but the city has decided to look at 3 of them, because we figure if without the correct foundation, you can't change. So if kids aren't entering school ready to learn, how do you change the initiative to make sure that they're reading at grade level? How do they graduate from high school? So let's give them the correct foundation. There's the primary school, there's Montessori school, there's Head Starts. So those organizations that are already there, and then there are some at-home daycare centers. How do we collaborate and bring all of those together to make sure that we're really focusing on the young people that are there?
Well, that's the question. How do you do it?
Well, you know, yeah, that is the question. I probably spent a good 30 years of my career working with communities around the country who wanted to really try to figure out how to do more of that which was good. And by that I mean those things that worked. Because we often have examples in our communities of things that are working for a tiny minority of kids, but rarely do we see those things operating at scale. Rarely do we see them impacting, you know, the majority of the children. So we wonder, why is that? Well, there are lots of reasons for that. But I think this initiative is, well, one of the things we found, and go back to what Lisa just pointed out in saying that this was focused on 3 of the 6. One of the things I have found in my experience is that if communities don't, in fact, narrow the focus when they're aligning their energies, they stay too scattered to ever go to scale on anything.
So how do you get, and this has come up several different times now in our conversation, aligning the energies? How do you, when you have groups with their own missions, their own mission statements, their need for getting grants, how do you get them to align their energies? And how do you say to them, it's in your interests, not only as a group, but for the children? How do you get them to kind of get out of their own silos?
So, and I think we have been, that's what we met was it last week or so, we met on a
Yeah.
Friday to try to convene the groups that are working in these areas to say, let's come together and align. Let's talk and agree that this is the initiative that we want to push together, or we want to mobilize and move together, so that if there's not one person pulling everything or pushing everything or doing the heavy lifting. So the idea was that we would bring the nonprofits who are doing the work, or the organizations that are doing the work, to the table. Let's have a conversation, because we don't have all the answers, but we know we want to make this change and move things forward. So if we bring them together and say, if we truly want to change this area within our community, we are going to have to come together. If not, we will have this conversation 5 years from today. We'll be talking about another initiative, and we don't want to get to that point where we're talking about another initiative if we're going to change things for our children.
So what
Right.
will it take?
Well,
That seems to be the
that-
hardest
that's
thing.
the-
How do you get,
that's the work.
yeah,
That
groups
is the work.
to align their
That-
energies?
that is the work, because you know, whenever you begin working with nonprofits, for-profits, governments, foundations, individual philanthropists, it doesn't matter. Whenever communities have a collection of all of those, and when people are doing things that are, and often good things, in pockets, they're committed to those good things that they're doing in pockets. But again, the problem is those good things rarely go to scale, because we can't align enough energy and effort behind any one or two of them to get enough people mobilized to bring them to scale.
Yes.
So what I think, one of the ways I like to think about what we're trying to do is really behind the city's leadership under MBK, is to really articulate almost a citywide, community-wide business plan in which all the nonprofits fit into that plan, to focus on moving, 3 indicators. Not 5, not 20, but to focus on moving 3 indicators, getting children ready for school, getting, at least 60% of the children in our schools reading at or beyond grade level by the end of 3rd grade, and really working to support those youth who need a second chance, or, keeping kids on track.
So when you talk about reading readiness and you talk about kids reading on track, rather than looking at the nonprofits and the work that they're doing, how much are you looking at the school district?
All of the
All of
above. All of the above.
It's a collaboration.
Right.
So we know that the reading is taking place in the schools, but there are some nonprofits that are working to help the schools to improve their reading score. So working with the nonprofits and the schools, but the schools necessarily, they absolutely have to be at the table.
Absolutely.
Because we can't do
Are
this. We're working on that. I know we had school board members who are willing to come to the table.
They are, yes. And I've been in contact with the superintendent. I think, yes. I would say yes. We're at early stages, frankly, from the initial launch a year ago to sort of really re-energizing or moving from talk to action.
Right.
We were in a talk phase.
Okay, you're not quite in the action
So,
phase.
well, we're in this is the action phase, but the action phase is not just about. A lot of times people conceptualize the action phase as being, okay, so now we're doing X to move Johnny or to help, Lisa or whatever. But the action phase is the mobilization. The beginning of the action phase is really, figuring out or be doing the hard work of aligning and bringing all of those people to that same table to agree to move this indicator in that direction for all the kids.
So why should that be that hard? I'm thinking we all can sit around the table and say, yes,
Right.
I will agree to mobilize my efforts to move that indicator. Next step. We have the agreement. Now, the city has a local action plan. Did the city come up with a local action
Yes,
plan?
we worked on the local action plan. I don't know that it's actually published yet.
Yeah, no, it's in draft, right?
Right, it's a draft form of how we get there. So yeah, it's looking at the local action plan, and now how do we have to implement the plan.
Can you tell us something about what's in that plan?
I don't have all the details.
Well, it really is it's what Lisa was said. It's really, the plan really sets up taking the action. So in other words, the plan was a process where the community identified those 3 areas as the areas of focus.
Okay.
So the planning process was that's why we called it sort of the talk phase, because there, you know, when you said it's easy to get people to that's not easy.
Well, it
we
depends.
take it no, it's not.
Well, you know, it depends. You know, everybody can sit around the table and say, I will agree that we need to have kids at reading readiness.
Yeah, yes.
That's easy to say.
Yes, that's
I agree
all kids should
that
read.
Kids in the 3rd grade should be reading at 3rd grade
Absolutely.
level. I agree to that.
That's easy.
Yes,
Right.
that's what's easy.
Right.
But implementing that.
Right. So the next step is, so, Henrietta, since you agree,
What are you going
how
to
are
do about it?
you, Henrietta, going to help us move from where they are now to where we need to be?
So, you know,
Based on this metric.
it would be easy, Victor, to say, I am committed to doing what I have been doing in an effort to move that indicator.
And this is where this is
Yes,
this is
and
great
that's
stuff.
what each and every nonprofit will say. I
Yes,
am committed.
and that's what you
why
want.
we exist.
And that's what you want, because when we're doing this focused on the data. We're doing this focused on, so where have we been? Where are our kids right now? And where do they need to be?
Well, we know where they are.
Well, right.
We know that right now for East Palo Alto, according to this, 17% of our residents and 35% of our children under the age of 6 live in poverty. And that many kids are not reading at that 3rd grade level. And if they're not reading at that 3rd grade level, then they're most likely to get into the prison pipeline.
True.
Yes.
So we have the data.
Right.
Yes. So the question, but this is my point. So, but if you were to ask people right now, if you were to go outside and ask folks, so what percentage of kids do you think can't read at the end of 3rd grade coming out of the schools? What do you think they'd say? You think they'd even be close? The answer is they're not. They really aren't.
Well,
And so what part of this process has really been about getting us all grounded in the same real data about where our kids are and where we want to move them to. So if you're doing, let's say you're running a program. I'm just going to, Henrietta's reading program. I'm making this up.
That's
obviously.
okay.
And let's say you've been doing that program for 5 years. And I say, well, Henrietta, you have the program. So these kids are in your program. Their reading is the same as it was before as well. Do we need to sort of revisit the way you're going about that? Because of the data, because of what's happening
well,
with
you
the
know
kids.
what? You talked about a few kids, and the kids in these programs might be doing well. So the people heading the programs will say, well, no, you don't have to look at what we're doing, because what we're doing is paying off.
Well, then
It's
those
successful.
people, and then those people can help the other people.
But the question is, one that you put your finger on, how do we make that system-wide?
Sure.
And the
Yes.
people involved in their individual programs
got it.
aren't necessarily in a position to make it system-wide.
You have to connect them.
But it seems to me what's really central is the school district. Because it's the school district that has all of these kids and a curriculum supposedly designed to get them there.
So, and I agree with you in it, but if we look at the school district for 3rd grade, but if you're talking about the preschool
Ready to
part, the
learn.
readiness, they're not in school yet. So
Right.
then you have different types of early childhood education
Right.
programs. So how do you have a universal program where there's a curriculum that we're making sure that everybody is studying?
asking?
But that's part of when we were sitting
Yes.
down, we were trying to
That's
have a
exactly right.
conversation about what needs to be on the table and how do we make sure that, so somebody may have a home daycare center, and how do we then measure what is happening in the home daycare center so that kids are entering school ready to learn if that's what you choose to do. So there has to be at some point a curriculum that's around that initiative so that we can, how do you measure it if there's nothing to
Yes,
measure
but
it
it
against?
seems that that might be what you're asking people to do, is to accept some universal set of
Yes.
standards.
Yes.
Well, absolutely.
Yes,
but
that's true.
why should they do
Yes.
that if they can show that what they've been doing is getting their kids reading ready? So if I'm running a successful program that's showing results, why should I
How are you
change
defining results?
Well, let's say I have 10 kids.
Yep.
And by the time the kids get out of my program, they're already reading
Based on what?
based on their individual attainment.
No,
So
but
how
that's,
They
how
can
do you
sit
measure
down.
that, though?
Well, they can sit down and they can read this little kindergarten book, John ran down the hill carrying his apple.
But see,
So then how do we scale that so that so we're not just saying that my program will take care of just my 10 and then I'm going to leave 100. So how do we
But
scale
I don't
your
have
program?
access to 100.
So how do we then scale your program so that others can then meet the criteria that your children are doing?
So before you approach somebody to scale their program,
Right.
then do you tell them what's in it for them?
well, you don't
To
actually
scale
approach
their
them to
program.
scale. Well, the idea is if their program really is moving the needle and can actually help this whole thing move to scale, our plan, the whole point of this is to, when I talked about the community-wide business plan, is to create a plan that can attract far more additional funding, both nationally, locally, and nationally. So that is, I mean, a win is to have a fundable agenda.
Yes.
You know, that is where we
Measurable.
can, but going back to something you were saying, the reason I was pushing so hard on the how do you know that they can read, that's where we break down. Because if the schools are saying, the schools are held to a standard that, you know, they use, the state test is what determines whether kids are reading at the end of third grade. So that's it. So if you want to use something else, fine, but then how do we know that you really are teaching kids to read or read well enough?
So why-
we have to agree on that standard.
Yes, but if I'm successful in the program that I'm running and I'm getting grants for the program that I'm running, why should I make any changes?
Because the kids can't read.
The kids in my program can read
Based on what?
based on their reading.
I know.
The
see,
proof
so
is
we're-
in the pudding. But why do I have to prove that to
I know.
you?
You don't have to prove it, but if we're going to change outcomes for
For
our
children, right.
we can't say that I'm going to take care of my set and it's just going to be about me and my 10, whatever the numbers are. If we're going to change outcomes for our children, we have to have a larger program that's really going to encompass everyone. So it's the same thing as if when we bring in different charter schools and different things that take away resources from schools and we leave other children behind. Is it fair to the students that are left behind? Because they're still
Well,
need to
they're
be.
left behind in a public school system that's responsible
true.
for teaching them.
Yes.
So it's not that I've left them or my program has left them. It's just that I've come up with what I think is a better program that's going to show results.
But if you have a program that's showing results, why would you keep it to yourself and not want to share it so that children can learn? Then how do we find more funding for you so that more children can get into your program so you're not just impacting
So
10?
how do I know that your effort, that your intent is to find more money for me and my program?
Well, one, we say it, and two, it's only that way if based on an agreed upon standard. That's why it's so important to agree upon what constitutes
So-
being able to read.
Yes, and what that means is that all the other programs have to sit down with you, right? And say, well, this is what we're doing.
That is what this is how we determine whether Victor can read.
So Victor,
That's what we have to agree on.
so Victor,
Not how to do it.
this is a new program, an MBK challenge, that hasn't been tested, has it? It's a new initiative.
Well,
It's
Is it any different from Head Start?
Oh, it's not a program.
It's not a program.
No, we
Okay,
don't, we run
it's
no
an
programs.
initiative. It's
Yes.
an initiative. It's a challenge.
And we do know that Cradle to Career programs
All
and
over the country
initiatives
have been very
will
successful.
work.
Yes.
But we have to have, everybody has to be at the table and coming together to make a difference. We have to work to make a difference in a collaborative way.
Okay, so once everybody has agreed, and I think we're back to
Right.
How do we get it?
Right.
back to one again. Once everybody has agreed, okay, we're all on the same page. This is what we want. These are our standards. What's the next step?
So now it gets easier. See, because that part that you just laid out is that's the hardest part of the work. Now it actually does get easier because now people can, both amongst themselves and within their own agencies and organizations, think about, okay, so now that we're all clear as to what we're trying to do and where we're going, and if we all can agree to move in that direction, we can attract more resources to our community. What can be our contribution as an organization to that goal?
No.
What is it that we can do that actually can move that we agreed
I'm
on?
glad you went to the next step. Unfortunately, I have to go back again.
Okay.
Because it
I
occurred
thought that's
to
where
me.
you wanted to go.
It occurred to me, and this is another hard part of it, getting everybody to agree to that standard.
Yeah.
How
Yes,
do we know that the standard you're going to come up with is a standard that's better than the one I'm already using?
But I'm not going to come up with it.
No, I think we're collectively,
Right.
we've decided to sit down and have
Right.
the collective impact. So we're going to come together and work collaboratively. So
That's
not
what-
taking anything away from any other organization.
Okay, yes, but it's a matter of trust to sit down and share what it is that I'm doing that
course.
I've been successful
Course.
with. That once I put it on the table, somebody else might say, "Oh, I'm not doing that."
Right.
That's something that I can do in my program.
Which would be good, wouldn't it?
So,
Because then you potentially could
Why are
impact
you doing
100
what you
children
do
when
in
you
the
just do
anyway?
10.
yes, but at the same time, when you go out for funds, you have to prove why your program is unique and why you're doing something that's valuable that the next group isn't doing. And if you
Here's what I
sat
do.
down,
Here's what I absolutely know. And
absolutely,
this is absolutely.
I thought there were a few absolutes.
No, this is
but-
an absolute only because of sitting on. I spent a lot of time on the other side of the funding table with Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and so forth. No, what you have to be able to prove is that your program makes a difference, not that it's unique.
Right.
We don't care. Funders in general.
Okay.
They,
Presumably, my unique program makes a difference.
I don't really even care if it's unique.
Okay, presumably my program makes a difference.
And I'm
So
gonna-
why is it that I'm going to share what I'm doing that's making a difference with somebody else who also can go to that funder
Right.
and say, we're making a difference too? And presumably there is limited funding.
Well, that's the presumption.
around.
One of the things. It's interesting. One of the funny things in sort of that sector, that philanthropic sector, and it's really true here in Silicon Valley. I've never lived. I moved from New York City here. And New York City is a pretty big hotbed of philanthropy. But one thing we always used to say, "Oh, there's plenty of money for good ideas. Plenty."
Yes.
The hard part is demonstrating that it's good. That's the hard part. The hard part wasn't, there was plenty of money to go around. It wasn't, we'd fund both programs. We'd fund all three programs. There's money in this greater community that would fund if they believed based on acceptable metrics. That's why I keep going back to
Victor,
the metrics thing.
Victor, there is something else I think that you all will have to convince people of.
What is that?
That the people with the money really care. Because you have these foundations and philanthropists.
Right.
Do they really care about educating kids in lower income communities?
I will
Do
say,
they
I
really?
will say yes.
And some of them will say, for example, the Hewlett Foundation put $5 million in the Neighborhood Initiative Fund. And then the Peninsula Community Foundation, about 11, 12 years ago. and then the Silicon Valley Community Foundation's putting money out there. Those foundations show that they cared, but I would think it's easy for some to say, well, you know, we've been there, we've done that, and
they are all
it hasn't made that measurable difference.
Right. That
so
is
why
true.
are we still where it is that we are?
What?
If the money is getting the money is going to make the difference.
Because of what you just said.
Oh, really? Okay. What is it that I just said?
Because they are spending the money as they did before, and it's all in search of making a measurable difference.
Those foundations.
Yeah, but the question, the original question was, do we believe
Yes.
that many philanthropies that focus on education are sincere? And my response was yes. I've worked in a few of them. Yes, absolutely. But
and they're really to give up money again after.
Well, they're still they're spending more now
where
than they
there
did before.
hasn't been any. You know, if the money and this is what a lot of people would say, if it's money that makes that much difference, and I can remember years and years ago somebody said, well, you just throw money at it and that'll solve the problem.
Well, that won't
and so money has been thrown and thrown and thrown, and we're still back at this data, at this where.
Because it's not a money problem.
No, it's not.
It is a what
so
we do
others
problem.
would say it's individuals who have to take the initiative to make a difference for themselves. And that hasn't been done. It's like children will have to go to school wanting to learn. And families have to be there behind their kids.
Yes.
Supporting them in this desire to learn. So it might be the value system.
I believe children clearly want to learn. And I agree with you. It's going to take, you can't send your child to school and just expect the teacher to work miracles.
Right.
It has to go home, and you have to work at home with it as well. So when we talk about the collaboration and the collaborative, it's not just the teacher, it is the parent and the community as well. How do we change expectations in the community for families, for children? And I think that's part of this initiative as well. Changing the expectations to know that, and connecting education with opportunity. Then when you can connect education with opportunity, I think you can make a difference. When children understand, or when people understand that you have an education and you can then attribute that to your wealth and how you're going to live later on, I think you can make a difference. And that's part of it as well.
I hate to say what some of the statistics are showing
About what?
with all of the kids who now think that education is their way to a better life, finding that they're still last hired, first fired, and may not even get a foot in the door. So that's something else that has to be considered.
Now we're in now we're actually in almost a different conversation.
Yes, we are. We better stick with the one.
That's diversity.
But we're talking
now we're in
about
an equity conversation.
But we're yes, but you know what? We're talking cradle to grave. And I think you have to look at all components of it.
Yes.
And you can't change one and make a difference in it without also looking at the other one.
Right. Now, we're actually talking cradle to career with MBK, not to grave. Just to be clear. And no, seriously,
Yes,
it really
is cradle to career.
It's cradle to career, not grave.
Oh, well, when you're talking about keeping them out of the prison pipeline.
That's keeping them out, yes.
Okay, so we're still...
Right, we're still 0 to 24, roughly. Birth to age 24-ish.
Okay, so, well, it's important to have those parameters.
Yes, and that was the intent of the original MBK initiative, was that cohort of focus.
But you can't, and we're assuming right now in my question that you're preparing them to succeed.
We want them to, yes.
Yeah,
and when they do their part.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Well, I define success, particularly for all children, but particularly for our children of color, as preparing them to have options to do what they choose to do, to sort of pursue what their interests are, to be able to do so and stay gainfully employed and have options with respect to relationships and other things. It's about options.
Yes, it is about options, and you're reminding me of a letter that I read where the writer says, when someone tells my child that they can dream to be whatever it is that they want to be, then I have to tell them about the statistics. And those statistics that talk about how many are in the prison pipeline, or those statistics that talk about the failure of the schools in terms of educating them, and those statistics that talk about being pulled over by the police and treated.
Right.
And so when you talk about the options, what are we really talking about? We're talking about changing the expectations of our kids.
Right.
With an end to having them pursue the options. But we're also talking about equity. So aren't we also fighting on the other end to make sure those options and those opportunities are there, that we're telling our kids, these are here for you?
The answer is yes.
Yes.
But the answer is absolutely yes. But I think, I take this really personally in terms of, they're like my kids. Without going into a whole life story, but I think, well, so what would I want for my own kid? If I can't answer the question about your kid the same as I answered for mine, something's wrong.
Right.
And I do, actually. And so when I see a young man, a young woman, of color walking up the street and then X, Y, and Z, and I'm thinking, well, what would I want them to be able to do? I want them to be able to have the same choices and options that my own kids. So then I have to think backwards. Well, why did they? Okay, what was important? Where were the? Well, reading, being able to read by the time they were both out of third grade was a huge deal.
Yeah.
That was really important. Based on what standard? I know what standard it was. I'll share it with people. We can talk about it. But the fact of the matter is, I want all kids to have those same kinds of options, because I know what it led to as adults, as they became adults. But they made choices. You never made them do anything. We want them to be able to think critically. We want them to have, a healthy social and emotional development, all of those things. So we're trying to figure out how to get a community talking about and acting in the same direction, so to provide that basket of supports. So kids, so there are more options. We're really trying to improve probabilities. There are no guarantees for anything for anybody, but that's not the point.
As a mother, I raised my 3 children, and they attended school and are from East Palo Alto. But I knew that I had to make them my investment, like their education and their future. I had to invest in them. So we did a lot of reading, and I made sure that I stayed on them with homework. We did homework together. I was there at the school. I can now say that I have my youngest daughter graduated from Spelman. She did her graduate program at USC. I have a daughter who graduated from Arizona State. But I set the expectations for them, and they knew in order for them to have an opportunity and an opportunity for a seat at the table, they had to be ready for that.
Right.
So, and that's what we're saying. Let's change the conversation, or let's talk about it and invest. My mother was the same way. We could never say we were bored growing up. There were too many books around our house to read. So you always pick up a book. We learned early, never say that I'm bored, because you can read a book, and a book will take you anywhere, and it could do anything for you. So it's having that support. You need support at home as well.
And there are those who would say that the MBK challenge is racist, that it's limited, that it's focusing on a specific group of people.
It is.
It is.
Are you saying it's racist?
It's not racist.
I don't call that
and one
racism.
should say, why shouldn't it be more inclusive? You say all children. Shouldn't that then be all children? So how do you defend the focus?
I don't have, it's really interesting. I don't have a problem with identifying populations of people to target for anything. I don't have that. It's an interesting dynamic. So if we know we have an equity challenge in this country, which we know we do, anybody who tries to make like we don't, I argue is kind of like sort of got a head in the sand, because we do. There are equity issues, there are challenges. Now, are there bad actors on all sides? Yes. Mm-hmm. Are there prejudices in all directions? Yes. Is there such a thing as systemic racism? Yes. Are there organizations that have, by virtue of history, sort of predicated themselves to act in a certain way as it relates to race and gender? Yes. To not acknowledge that and then try to move towards some level of adjustment or redress with that in mind, I think is silly. I mean, I think it's like taking on apartheid by saying, but we're all the same. You wouldn't do that. You would never do that.
To the people who are practicing apartheid, I would think that might be a reasonable response to say, you're discriminating against us.
But you had to say the country had to change. You couldn't go out there and say, well,
I have to prove why we're all the same. I have to prove why I'm just as entitled to those rights that you've kept me away from or denied me. Mm-hmm. Yes.
You're saying you should have to prove? Or?
Well, wasn't that what the fight was all about? No.
Proving that? No, it's not legal, systemic.
Yes, it's something called human rights. However, the people who are denying you those rights don't think that you're...
Oh, that you should have those rights.
Yes,
That's
exactly,
possible.
That somehow you're inferior.
It's possible. Some think that, some don't know any better.
Right.
Some have always lived in a system where it's been that way. I mean, I'm not going to blame you.
So Victor says he doesn't consider it racist. And I assume you don't either.
I don't
Why
find
not?
it racist. If we're still having conversations about equity within the Silicon Valley and our jobs, and if we're looking at those of color who are represented in the companies in this region, we need to continue to have this conversation. We need to continue to make sure that there's some equality when it comes to opportunities. So if our children are left behind, if we don't fight for them, who will? And we have to be willing to say there's some equity issues, and we want to make sure that we're going to at least educate our children equally.
Right, right. And those equity issues are fairly clear. I mean, it's sort of like gender. Same issue, same thing. I mean, if we're not honest, you can look and see where there's gender inequity. You can see it. Now, if we want to make but it discriminates against men, to address women's issues.
That is an argument
because
that was made
some years.
It's reverse discrimination.
Of course it is.
And you're giving, it's
exactly
like a quota system. You're giving seats to people who might not be qualified. And if we're talking discrimination, then we have to end it all, right? This preferential treatment.
Of course that's the argument, and it doesn't bear water. It doesn't hold. Doesn't hold up.
No.
I can debate that one forever. It doesn't hold up as you extend it out, because what it does is it just allows for continuous oppression. I mean, if I'm already in the dominant seat, and I argue that any leveling of the playing field is unfair.
Yes, because it's gonna take my jobs.
No, but
it's gonna challenge my privileges.
Yes,
wait! Don't tell that to the people who voted for Trump, who said that they were out of work, and all of the manufacturing and all of the jobs went overseas.
I lived in Ohio. I know those people. So I raised my kids in Ohio. Yeah.
Yes.
That's exactly what I tell them.
What?
That they weren't their jobs. They were American jobs. I mean, those jobs were not their jobs.
But they held them. They had them.
Yes, just
until
like
they lost them. And now
Well,
there
they
are other
didn't lose
people
them.
who are
Those
taking
jabs
them,
left.
and they're so-called immigrants to come into the country.
But the country's all immigrants.
Yes.
This is, unless you're an American Indian,
We're
this
all-
country is all immigrants.
And there's some that are supposed to be here and some.
The country's all immigrants.
So,
Yes.
having established that, some of the immigrants were citizens, let's go back to the steps.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we got to getting that agreement,
trying to
and we got to having the standard, agreeing on the standards.
So that's what we're doing right now
Yes.
through our meetings. We are coming together as a group, bringing those stakeholders that are doing the good work, the great work that's happening in the community, bringing them to the table to talk about how do we then bring a universal approach. I don't want your those things that are sweet to you. I don't want you to give me any information that will harm your organization. But what we really want to do, if we're going to change outcomes, we have to talk about how we do that in a holistic approach, and how do we set standards so that our children are learning and getting what they need.
Okay, so we've set the standards, and we're talking about the action plan. That's still drafted. We've agreed on the standards, so where do we go from here? What's the implementation?
We've agreed.
On the
Well, it's where we diverted about half an hour ago, and I
Yes,
think
yes.
it's at that point where, okay, if we have truly agreed
yes.
on both the population we're focused on, because that's always important. We've also agreed on how we're going to determine whether or not we're successful. In other words, what it means that Johnny can read or not, and we're going to agree on what that looks like.
Okay.
Then we can, within our organizations, within our strengths, we can actually come together and say, okay, here's how our organization can work with you to move that needle toward 60% or more. Obviously, you want all, but you know, we usually pick numbers like 60, 70% to get us away from the 15 that we're at right now. Because when you start talking about really making a difference for that many kids, you've changed systems. Big things have to change. It's not little things. You know, you're going to start getting out of this program mindset and into a systems mindset. And so, but that's kind of where, so when I say we're early in the process, that's.
But don't we need measurable outcomes?
Right, we're
too,
still
at
at
the
that,
end.
right.
At the end of the day,
Right.
once we set the parameters and we know where we want to go, we need measurable outcomes, because I think there are going to be adjustments that need to be that will have to happen at some point. But at the end of the day, we need to measure reading. How do we measure the reading at the end of the day?
And that's why it's so important that we
How
agree
do
on what that looks like.
Right. And then how do we look and see, you know, it was interesting. I attended a Strive, which is a Cradle to Career initiative in Phoenix a few weeks ago. And the city of Tacoma has changed their graduation rates for their city by 85%. So they were known that their kids would not graduate. In 4 years, they've changed that initiative. How did they do that?
Right.
Those are the things that we have to look at and see. How do you change the graduation rate so that more of your children are graduating? There was something that happened, and everybody had to agree on impact and what they were going to do to get there. That's what we're trying to accomplish with our initiative. Put processes in place that we can all agree to, because at the end of the day, if we really want to change outcomes, we're going to have to collaborate, because we do have a lot of smaller organizations that are doing great things, but how do we learn from that, and how do we glean from that? And we appreciate those nonprofits who are out there working and doing the hard work.
Absolutely.
But today we're still talking about numbers that are deficient.
Well, it would be interesting to measure how many young people starting kindergarten or starting first grade in the community right now are reading ready.
I agree.
Right.
And we don't have that data yet, do we?
I don't even know if we know how to measure it, because
it's
again,
not
if
very
you
good.
have a home daycare center that's Head Start, how do you measure that or test that child and then test them against a Montessori or a primary school or a Head Start and make sure that there is that everybody's being measured on the same parameters? How do you then I don't think that part is
So
in place.
can you go to, whom can you go to? Well, we've talked about the standards. Are there standards that public schools use to measure reading readiness?
The answer is yes.
Yes. And we have the Big Lift too, right?
Yeah,
What
Big
does the
Lift uses
do?
the same ones,
Yes.
but they're not mandatory in California. So
But those
they exist.
standards are
and they exist.
acceptable,
Oh, absolutely.
acknowledged. So
Absolutely.
those are the standards that
and
you
they
can
exist,
use.
right?
So, and those are the people we want at the table.
So those are standards you can agree
Right,
upon.
right.
Yes.
And you think
Well, that's
everybody else might agree
that's
upon.
that's the hope, right? That's the part. That's the work. The work is getting people to say, yeah, well, because you always have people. I mean, you had people who fought and still do Common Core because they say it's a plot to whatever to get us all on the same page. I don't know, but you know, the reality is all it ever was. It was never a program. All it ever was the articulation of certain standards and milestones.
So what would be wrong with getting us all on the same page?
Nothing.
Isn't that what
We
you
would
want?
like that.
We want.
We would like that. That's
Okay.
that's the goal.
So we have that agreement. We have that agreement in terms of measurements, what we might use for measurements.
Yeah, that's where we want to get.
And then what do we do?
Well, then you work toward it, but we got to get there first. We're not there yet.
But once you have it, I'm
Oh yeah,
just
then
running through.
you align. Then you can sort of align efforts that have demonstrated effectiveness in getting us there.
So are you saying in terms of aligning efforts that then all of the nonprofits and all of those that you want to bring in will be using those same standards?
We'll be using those the same milestone. Yeah, absolutely.
Milestone.
Right.
So will that take
Not programs, but milestone. Yes.
just accepting the milestones, not necessarily
Not
implementing?
how you do. Well, not right.
You're not asking for implementation.
Well, no, we're not asking you. We don't want to tell you because we don't think we can how
To
to
do it.
get to the milestone. But the fact is, if I'm saying, Henrietta, you need to move your hand to that cup, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I can see if you do it or not, right? Because we
Sure.
both agree that moving that cup is what's important. So, same thing with this. You know, we're not going to tell any organizations how to
And you're
get us
not
to that
going to
point.
ask them
But that's
to
where we got to go.
implement what it is they've agreed to before you go off to funders. You're going
What
to
it is they've
show
agreed
that you
to.
have agreement on the standards and that there is an alignment in that agreement.
We
think
need
that's
to.
right.
I believe we need to demonstrate that there is an agreement or alignment
Yeah,
for
we
funders.
do have to
We do.
demonstrate that because they want to know. If I'm a funder, I want to know that we're all talking about moving that same cup,
And so
and
when
it's
you're
not simple.
when you're going to seek funding, what are you seeking funding for?
Those organizations that have
Each of those individual organizations to implement the plan
yes,
that they've
the
agreed
collective
to.
yes.
Okay, so let's talk about some timelines.
We can talk
Okay,
about.
we can talk about them all you
Let's
like.
talk about timelines.
I can give you examples of communities where cradle to career initiatives have timelines of fast ones. You see some movement in 3 years, 4 years. I've seen ones that go 8 to 12 and making a massive difference, but they take time.
Okay, the biggest thing now, I guess, in the first step is getting that agreement.
It is.
So what's your timeline for getting that agreement? Is there a timeline?
We're working on it.
ASAP, I
We
mean,
would
it's
like to have it done rather
sooner
sooner
rather
than
than
later.
later, yeah.
You were recently in a meeting with us, and we had to step back because
We needed other people.
we needed more people to the table. We needed more people, the right people, to come to the table for this conversation in order to make this an effective
It needed to be a
initiative.
bigger conversation.
So let's talk about the ideal situation.
I like those.
What would be the ideal? Nothing like having something to look forward
No,
to,
I like
something to
those.
strive for.
Sure. So I think ideally we would have liked to have had this all wrapped up by the end of this year. Ideally.
It's not too late. We still have
So
two
we're
more
still
months.
working on it. So we're still working on it, and really to a point where we can start making an impact. To me, if we're going to look at a school year, We're already in this current school year, so I won't say it's a wash, but really we want to start out at the beginning of the school year so that we can actually do the measurements. If I were to measure,
well, I'll just put it in terms of historical precedent. I've never seen any community take on a collective action or that showed any sort of movement in any sane direction in less than 3 years ever. Now, and that's within MBK as well. Whether you look at Philadelphia or other places that say they're doing X, Y, or Z, they're just turning the corner right now in terms of being able to measure and see.
So let's talk about some of those cities. You mentioned Philadelphia.
There's lots of cities.
Okay, can you mention them? It's nothing like having other cities to point to
Sure,
to say
Boston.
that they have taken up the challenge and they're moving ahead.
Sure. So Boston, Philadelphia, Birmingham. I know here in the Bay Area, Richmond is at the table.
Richmond.
Oakland, San Jose.
Yep.
I don't know that there's a San Francisco.
I don't know about San Francisco either.
I don't know that San Francisco, but we were just at an MBK meeting in Long Beach. So Long Beach, they're in the state of Washington, Seattle. There are a lot of different cities that are at the table making this happen. But when I spoke with Mayor Nutter, former mayor, the former mayor of Philadelphia, he was the one who was really eager and ready to make this happen. He has been working on this for a long time.
So the title of this show is What Has Happened to the MBK Challenge?
Yes.
And you've talked about all of these cities that have joined the challenge or have accepted the challenge.
Right.
Right.
Last words.
You know, this initiative, if it's left for me, because this is important to me, because our children are our future and we need to make sure that they have opportunities, we're going to work hard to make sure that we can keep the MBK initiative alive in order to make a difference and change outcomes for our children.
Well, and as a person who is relatively new to this community, but has spent a lot of time all over the country working in communities in complex community building initiatives, I think the potential in East Palo Alto to align what we're talking about, to get that kind of alignment and actually move a needle in the right direction is high. I mean, I really do believe that it is doable here. I just think it's always more work than anybody thinks it is. And so we just got to keep at it.
Yes.
Well, given what the statistics are right now in terms of the community, the reading levels, the prison pipeline, there is a lot of improvement that can be made. And so we talked about the MBK Challenge more than a year ago on this show.
Yes.
So I will invite you back.
Good.
Yes. I look forward to
That'll
it.
be fun.
Whether it'll be 1 year
we'll be
or
talking
3
about,
years.
Yeah, no, one. Just say one.
We'll be
To
talking
see
about
where you
outcomes.
Yeah,
are.
don't wait 3.
Oh, that's exciting.
One, yeah, we'll talk.
Well, I think you did say you haven't seen a city to do it in
Right,
less
but they
than
make
3.
progress though.
Okay.
So you need to do a progress check on us.
We will be doing a progress check. I thank you so much for talking about what you're doing now and some of the things we can expect for the future.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank our viewers for watching. Until next time. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice. Great conversation.
It's fun.
Well, I had fun.
I did.